Learn to learn faster or I'll be left behind.
For centuries, the history of the Judeo-Christian world has been presented as a finished product, a clean, linear story bound in leather, handed down through generations as a completed work. The actual historical record reveals a fractured landscape, an ancient crime scene littered with erased voices, glaring contradictions, and missing pieces. Modern historians don't read these texts like a completed book. They interrogate them. They look for the silences and the gaps, treating every surviving scrap of parchment as evidence of a much larger, messier reality. To understand where these foundational beliefs came from, we have to look past the official story. We have to track down the evidence that rival factions intentionally burned, buried, or scrubbed from the record. The narrative we know is only a fraction of the truth. The rest has to be forensically reconstructed from the shadows. In the year 70 CE, the Roman Empire besieged Jerusalem and burned the vast Second Temple to the ground. The accepted historical consensus was that the site was completely obliterated, leaving 0 surviving structures. Then, in the 1930s, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, built on that same Temple Mount, underwent a massive restoration. When workers opened the ceiling, they found history hiding in the rafters for centuries. They extracted dozens of massive wooden tie beams used as support structures within the mosque. Carbon-14 dating and the study of ancient tool marks proved these beams didn't originate with the mosque. They were high-quality cedar and cypress, recycled from the structures of Herod's 1st century Temple Mount. Even when an ancient world is violently wiped out, physical fragments manage to survive through secondary use, hiding in plain sight right above our heads. Sometimes historical survival requires intentional concealment by persecuted groups. Out in the mid-20th century Judean Desert, in the remote caves of Qumran, archaeologists found caches of hidden documents. These are the Dead Sea Scrolls. They contained radical ideas that never made it into the Bible, including a 364-day calendar used by a rival Jewish sect that had completely broken away from the temple establishment. Parallel to this, in Egypt, the Nag Hammadi codices were unearthed. These books preserved Gnostic ideologies lost or destroyed during the early struggle to define Christian orthodoxy. Inside these codices was the Gospel of Mary, portraying Mary Magdalene as a premier visionary, giving her the authority to teach the male disciples, and directly challenging the leadership of Peter. The early religious landscape was politically dangerous. Rival factions were forced to bury their testimonies in the dirt to ensure their ideologies survived the purge. Physical artifacts and buried manuscripts are tangible. But what do scholars do when a piece of evidence doesn't physically exist, yet leaves behind a mathematical footprint? This is the synoptic problem. If you look at the Gospels of Matthew and Luke, they share massive blocks of verbatim Greek text. Curiously, these specific shared passages do not exist in the Gospel of Mark. The two-source hypothesis demonstrates that Matthew and Luke both copied from Mark while simultaneously pulling from a second unknown document. By extracting the text Matthew and Luke share, scholars reverse-engineered this ghost document, dubbing it the Q source. Because this reconstructed text is almost entirely ethical instruction and parables, it lacks any mention of a sacrificial death or resurrection. This absence suggests that for the community behind Q, Jesus' significance resided in his radical wisdom rather than his fate on the cross. Sometimes the most profound historical truths are invisible. We can only find them by analyzing the literary shadows they cast onto surviving texts. The evidence suggests that the polished, linear version of biblical history fails to account for the reality on the ground. Behind the official record lies a chaotic web of competing ideas and factions that spent centuries vying for influence. Recovering these suppressed texts and phantom sources doesn't destroy modern traditions. It exposes the intense political and intellectual struggles of the people who actually lived through that era. The historical record preserves the version that survived the ideological wars of the past, but the truth remains buried in the dirt and encoded in the literary shadows, waiting to be reconstructed. A moment of wonder. The case of ancient history is never truly closed.